Hello, adventurers. All right, make sure that you can hear me okay. Got that. That looks good. Okay, so thanks for joining me here in the studio. Again, as I'm working on the world building. So, welcome to World Building Wednesday. So, over the last 10 years, again, we built layers upon layers of this world. We've opened parallel stories with multiple campaigns, 15 players controlling 33 PCs. We encountered almost 200 named PCs during that time. Now, my problem is I gotta ensure I catalog this all correctly. So, over the next 2 hours, what this is for those of you that are new, I'm going to go through 3 episodes, scene by scene, and we're going to rediscover some of the magic as well as ensure I've captured these details correctly. You can go to codex.dicetowertheater.com if you're ever interested in looking at all the details. And so let's go ahead and get started. So, where we left off last time was we went through the prologue. Again, just to reiterate, those 3 episodes were created just as a background audio drama or audio story, audio adventure, however you want to say it, audio fiction, that I could give to the players and let them kind of discover it for themselves where things might go. Right. So later on in the story, they might discover some things, go back, see, oh yeah, that's from my childhood, that kind of a thing. So that's what we're seeing there. So that was the whole purpose of the prologue. Sorry, I'm talking in circles, and we've only just begun. So I'm going to bring up what we're starting on now. Now is the beginning of the story, right? So the actual story itself, the children have now grown up. They have moved to Port Lafort, and we'll go ahead and kick this off and walk through the scene and see what kind of strikes my mind as we go. All right, here we go.
For 10 years, I've had nightmares of that night. I saw our home destroyed. I watched the closest woman I had to a mother die.
This is fine work.
Why have you done this?
You killed my son. And my Laura.
My greatest teacher was lost as well.
No!
I couldn't save the one who rescued me.
My honor is my life.
I can still hear Zoran ask,
Where are we gonna go?
Dawn of Dragons, Season 1, Episode 1.
Reading 5 fathoms with sand and broken shells, sir.
Hard to port?
The bosun's cry was heard, followed by the familiar and much anticipated pipe. A boy about 20 looked back from the rolling sea. His dark brown eyes fell to the 20-foot wooden arm he currently straddled. The deck heaved 40 feet below his bare feet as he gently swayed with the tide. The once great square sail, pulled up where he had tied it off 20 minutes ago, draped below him in billowing waves. He breathed with purpose into his nose and smiled. That smell of the dockside fishery was actually a welcome sign. It always reminded him of copper and cucumbers when it was pleasant. Today was one of those days. He could hear the busy dock with workers and laughing sailors taking to the streets ready to spend their hard-earned coin. He felt the soft brown beard around his chin.
3 months.
He could confirm it had been 3 months since he smelled and heard Port Lafort. He grinned as he crawled his way to the web-like network of ropes used as a ladder.
There's your pay, lads. Thank you for all your help.
The stout purser passed out a small bag of coins that jingled to each of them in turn. His blue eyes shone from behind the ruddy face and dark orange beard. A smile broke through.
Welcome home, Zoran.
All right. So I'm going to pause it there real quick. So things I picked up in that one, of course, we had the opening that harkens back to the prologue. So that way it kind of starts off the story. If someone wants to, they can go back and listen to the prologue all the way through. But you can gather what happens for the most part in that little snippet, little vignette. I found it interesting in listening to it again, right? That now, granted, this is before we got the full crew and so many people that have joined us on the show. So not too many of us were there. So again, going back to Bianchi, Matthew Bianchi, you'll hear me talk about him quite a bit. The man of 1,000 faces, 1,000 voices with us. So he is the voice of the bosun and the voice of the purser, and in the flashback, he is the goblins with me. So what makes it less sinister sounding when you listen to it outside? So hopefully this doesn't ruin it for anybody, but when you listen to it outside and you hear the goblin voices, cackling over the body of Laura Hannah Shieldheart as the kids are riding, as the children are riding off into the rain. It's a very sad scene, right? Well, when we recorded it, it was just Matt and me, and we just kind of played off of each other, and so we're making the goblin voice. It's what we do, and all these little laughs. So that's what remembering how we did it makes it more, just kind of fun, just thinking back on it. But yes, you make it sound lonely and what have you. It's different. So Zoran's opening here was I always loved it because I love the sea, and we talked about that before. Ren Fair Pirate, all that stuff. So having him kind of looking out and returning home after the freedom of the ocean, I think is a kind of a powerful opening. So I like that. I thought that was nice. All right, so we're going to join Sophie. I'm going to back it up here. And here, let's go ahead and hit this one.
She walked down the street with purpose. Her long blonde hair was pulled back from her soft cheeks. Eyes blue like a deep ocean and lips that seemed to draw you closer, pulled back with a smirk as she shook her head ever so slightly. She knew there were eyes on her. She just didn't care. Nor did she ever care for the affections men provided. The dark scales of her armor cast a red hue at the edges, held back at the waist by a braided auburn belt, from of which swung the sheathed longsword capped on either end with simple brass work. It was sword of purpose, not a fancy wall hanger. It was her paycheck. Her boots fell on the ground strong as she walked. The strength she possessed couldn't be seen where her arms alone rippled as she walked. The smell of sweet meadow flowers mixed with oiled steel and leather as she passed by. She returned from collecting payment for what she politely called a hunt. She was happy. This was another one she was able to subdue without death. She prided herself in returning stolen goods or bringing in wrongdoers without bloodshed. She wasn't a butcher after all. Be certain, though, she made a living off of what she was good at. That sword was as keen as her persuasive voice, and her arm as strong as her startling good looks. Strong, beautiful, and absolutely dangerous. She turned to the door of the shop where a hammer rang against the steel in the next room.
Good.
She smiled. Opening the door, a wave of heat washed over her, the smell of burning coals and hot steel. She saw the young man in a dark leather apron hammering a glowing bar. His dark hair fell like raven's feathers around his face in a very traditional cut. His face was clean-shaven and glistened with sweat, about his strong chin. She smiled at her chosen brother.
Benedict!
He looked up and smiled gently. He put the bar back in the glowing fire and walked to her with a grin.
Sophie,
He threw his arms around her.
when did you get back?
Just now, I thought I'd stop by before going to the house.
Thanks. It's great to see you. Tonight, Cordelia's performing at the Pig and Turtle. Will you join us?
Of course!
She thought of their little sister. She was amazing with both her flute and her voice. She should not be missed.
Great. I'll see you at home.
He patted her pauldron shoulder and returned to the forge. Sophie smiled. As she left, she felt a pang of regret gnaw at her heart. She remembered his brother, the only boy she had ever loved.
I miss you.
She whispered to herself as she left. If she would have not have been in her own thoughts, she might have noticed the hammer paused for a moment, as Benedict remembered too.
Okay, so there we have Sophie, of course, walking down the street, and I picked up on her armor's red, so good. I've kept that throughout the story, so that's good. So she's got the red armor, the auburn belt. She's got long flowing blonde hair. When she meets up with Benedict, who's the blacksmith, right? In fact, let me go bring this up here real quick. So we have, yeah, there we go. This is a good one. So here in the you have Cordelia up here at the top. And we remember the prologue, there was the kids. So this painting by Storm. So I always loved it because it's got them as kids and then behind them now grown up, and you can see how they kind of become the adults that they are, right? So going from the left, it's Cordelia, then Sophie, then Zane, then we have Zoran and Benedict. Okay, so as we go through the story, of course, as I've said before, if you're new to the story and coming in, there's going to be spoilers throughout me streaming. So it is what it is. So but this is just fair warning on that. So with Sophie, you'll notice how the way Sophie is painted and Zane, it looks almost like they share an arm, right? They're kind of one person, and of course that is a hint at the future as things progress. Now, let's see, Sophie's a sword master. More importantly, her background was a bounty hunter, right? So classic backgrounds from D&D, bounty hunter. That works. When we came up with Sophie, what I always pictured in my head when Storm was like, I want Sophie to be kind of a tank of the group and what have you. I'm like, cool. It reminded me of Agnes from Robert E. Howard's Sword Woman, right? So one of my favorite characters of all time. If you've never read, many people are, of course, familiar with Conan, right? But Sword Woman is a story that takes place in France in like 17th century, something like that, going off the top of my head. But it opens up in the first scene is her getting forced into marriage. People are threatening, or the other women in her life have resigned to tell her, they're like, it's just better if you kill yourself. It's a terrible life and what have you. And she's like, I don't want any of this. So she kills her husband and jumps over the fence, and her dad shoots a bow at her, and she cackles madly and runs off, all within like the first 4 pages of the first story, because it's a trilogy of the book. I always loved this character. So a wonderful character. Sophie is a little bit more reserved, not quitely as reckless as that, but I always pictured like, no, she's not one to be messed with. That's the way she is. Benedict has taken on has put on the leather apron of the blacksmith to follow in the footsteps of his adopted father, Erebus. Right. So that's what he did for his background. Again, D&D backgrounds. He was a guild artisan, I think is what we had him as during that time. So that way he could craft and what have you. And then Zoran was going to be a swashbuckler. So we made him a sailor, right, to start off with. So that's how those 3 kind of came into being. So let's jump back into the story and see what these next parts are. Here we go.
Four cups of flour to 1 cup of sugar. Sprinkle of rose water and cinnamon. Beat 6 quail eggs.
The kitchen was alive with the sounds of pans and smells of fresh baked bread. A woman in a dirty apron was reading from an old scrap of parchment, carefully moving each item as she confirmed the ingredients. She paused and pulled her long red hair back from her face, revealing her slender jaw, high cheekbones, and her pointed ears. There was a decorated lacy cuff of purest silver around her left ear. It was shaped like a horse's head from the intricate twisting of the knotwork. Sitting across the oaken countertop sat her younger friend. Long black hair stood in contrast to her white blouse and corset. She was lost in thought as she commanded a small flame to dance over her knuckles. The heat wasn't enough to harm, it was just...
Cordelia!
Eleviv barked, jarring the young girl from her concentration, causing the flame to vanish.
Why,
Eleviv chuckled.
Are you gonna help me or what? It's for your employer, after all.
Cordelia laughed.
I'm sorry. I was just thinking.
Cordelia was embarrassed. She wasn't quite sure how to respond. She hesitated, but Eleviv could read through her.
About what? Come, you can tell me.
It's just, tonight is the first time playing this new song. And it's great you and everyone else will be there, but...
She paused and summoned some strength from deep within.
I wish Father and Mother were here.
Eleviv smiled.
Oh, Cordelia.
She wiped her hands on the cloth and walked to her, wrapping her arms around the young girl.
I do too, kiddo. I do too.
They both sighed and returned to the kitchen. Cordelia picked up the mixing bowl and spoon as she began adding the ingredients. She smiled suddenly.
I'm not sure why Aver likes these cookies so much.
She chuckled.
I think they're a little too fancy for a dockside tavern.
Eleviv looked at her with a smirk.
Well, even a dockside tavern is entitled to a little luxury now and then, I think.
She laughed, thinking of the jovial little man. He was shorter than most, at about 5 foot even. Known for bold silks with gold and bronze accessories, the owner of the Pig and Turtle Inn was a kind and fair man. He wasn't a pushover, though, as Elaviv had seen him leap up onto a table in order to dress down a drunken Minotaur sailor who was being aggressively rude with one of the barmaids. Avar loved the ladies that worked for him, but his true vice was sensual luxuries like soft silks, bold perfumes, gentle music, and delicate pastries. Some would whisper he was actually a half-dwarf, given his stature and love for the finer things. The door burst open and in walked Zoran. His deep purple tunic had been fastened over his white deck shirt. Carrying his canvas bag of belongings over one shoulder with a small ivory statuette in the other hand.
Yay!
Cordelia dropped the spoon into a bowl and ran to him, wrapping him up in a big hug. He chuckled.
Whoa there, kiddo. I missed you too. Oh, look. I made this as we made the journey to the Southlands. One of the mates had a piece of narwhal's horn. I beat him in a game of dice for it.
He smiled proudly, but after seeing the look of disapproval on Elaviv's face, quickly continued.
So, anyways, I was running the rigging, and really the journey was very calm this time. There were many hours that I had us sitting on the yard arm or on the larboard side, and we had a couple of benches set into the deck. I'd sit there and I'd whittle on this little guy.
He proudly turned the small white dragon over in his hand. The head was pulled back to where its chin laid against its bowed throat, forming a strong S shape. Its lips were pulled back, showing rows of sharp teeth, and the hands and feet were one piece together, with the tail coiled in the original horn shape to form the base upon which it sat when he placed it on the counter. No matter the fact that Zoran thought it was crude in some areas, Cordelia was entranced.
Oh, I love it.
She said as she crouched eye level, matching its own gaze.
Good,
He smiled.
because it's yours.
She threw her arms around him.
Zoran, thank you.
Of course.
Zoran said, chuckling, turning to Elaviv.
And something for...
Elaviv snickered.
You know
How you hate gifts. Yes, I know.
Quickly recognizing how she hated to be interrupted as well, Zoran reached into his belt and pulled out the pouch of his earnings, a shameful, apologetic smile across his worried face. Elaviv laughed as she brushed his hand, holding the gold aside, giving him a big hug.
Welcome home, you dirty pirate.
And they all laughed at the cheery reunion. A few hours later, Elaviv was finishing packing the small lady's fingers-styled cookies on a shiny silver baking pan she had placed a lace napkin on to make it look more, well, special. They couldn't afford fineries, after all. Benedict, Zoran, and Sophie were all getting caught up. Sophie had returned with a nice bit of money, enough to probably bring in a roast for the week. Zoran had paid the rent up to date, and Benedict had brought in some fresh apples and dried smoked fish from the dock on his way home. Cordelia was absent as she had left to go discuss with Avar the night's event he had planned and how her music would make...
This will be a night to remember. Yes, indeed. A night to remember.
She chuckled. Port Lafort really was a decent place for them. She missed her trees, but she periodically could leave and find an afternoon hunting in the forest a few miles out of town, a little peace to herself. She had her own memories, after all, and needed time, just herself, and the forest air, to keep those demons at bay. Benedict looked so much like his father, Lucilius, strong and proud. She smiled, and she thought how Cordelia was looking just like Laura Hanna. Zoran was shaping up to be a great man, but humble, unlike his father, Lord Pallas. She looked at Sophie. Sophie smiled at her friends and nodded as they told their tales, but Sophie's eyes would look out the window and look across the port of Lafort into the red-orange dusk beginning to settle on the town, looking for something. Elaviv sighed. She knew that look. Elaviv recognized that look in herself, as she had once loved and lost as well. But that was many years ago. Many more years than the 10 years that had followed the children since that one night in Alanotkan. Quickly brushing his memory aside, she noted the time.
All right. Are we all ready to go?
Yes.
Everyone excited rose up to go out into the bustling street where the street merchants had begun to pack up for the day, or to head and also join the bustling nightlife of the city. Elaviv chuckled again as she glanced protectively at the tray of treats in her hands, Avar's excitement plain in her mind.
Everyone must come. This will be a night to remember. Yes, indeed. A night to remember.
Okay, so let's hit that. One note I wanted to say about the music in that last piece right there. That's when I first used a piece that I'd written with that harp. And the name of it was the windmill. So again, going back to the windmill of the prologue, and I think that's that's when I first knew that I want to have that be a recurring theme every now and then. When the world changes, that theme kind of comes in. So you can, when something big is going to happen. You know, it's a harbinger, right? So let's see, what else can I tell you? Oh yeah, music wise too. There's the lonely woodwind that I've used in this and in the prologue. That is a sample of it's a sampled instrument of a duduk. And so I fell in love with the duduk when I'm a big Peter Gabriel fan. Let's just call it out like it is. And in his soundtrack for The Last Temptation of Christ, he used the duduk a lot. And he wanted, in an interview, I remember him talking about how the duduk struck him as the loneliest instrument. And so I've always loved that sound. So I try and use that every now and then, just kind of give that little slice of life, you know, what have you. Let's see here. What else? Let's zip down here. So you can see, you know, the cast itself. This was largely the whole thing. For many of the episodes, I had the whole season grab the cast in here. But the ones I wanted to point out in here, let's see here, Avar, there you go. So Adam was, Adam cracked me up. He was the most energetic agent I ever worked with. You know, I do tech support, right? And so I asked him to be a part of this show because he was just like over the top and too much fun. But he is from he's from Africa, and in fact he's from the Congo, if I remember right, where and he was one of my French speakers. So I always loved his accent, and so bringing him in as Avar was a blast. And of course, Sophie, Sarah Jenkins, Fox Jenkins, Cordelia, Jolene Fresquez, Benedict is Brian Dowling, Zoran is Cody Miller, and Zane is Storm S. Cone. Now, Storm played Sophie at the table. Zane was an NPC. And if you remember back when our last session, I explained that nobody forgave me for killing Zane, right? So I was still getting grief. Hence, Sophie's still, you know, still mourning his loss. It was made very clear that I was not supposed to do that. Let's see here. So that's the main ones. Oh, Elaviv. So let's talk about Elaviv Hawklight. So that's Jessica, my wife. She did an awesome job with this. She did as a favor to me. She is a wonderful performer, but she also hates hearing her voice. So it wasn't until years later that she actually listened to what she did. So she was like, I'll do it. And then I'm like, have you ever listened to the show? You know, we had one of those talks. So that was just kind of fun. But I don't blame her. Many people don't like hearing their own voice, right? Other characters are mentioned in there. There was Lucilius, which is important, and of course Laura Hanna, and Lord Pallas. We're already learning to not like Lord Pallas, of course. Talked about Ian last time, and he did a great job. So let's look at these pictures here. So you can see, in fact, let me just minimize me. Nope, that's the wrong one. This one. That doesn't do any good. Okay, fine. We're going to just use this one. So I put these out as little tidbits that I could use on social media. Really, we took the paintings from Storm, and I put their actual stats from the game at this time. Again, prologue, we took their stats, chopped them in half, and told them that they were kids so they could figure out what was going on. But you can kind of see a lot of the characters that you've met so far, all the good guys. I don't have any bad guys on here. But you have the kids, you have Elaviv, and then you have Laura Hanna and Erebus down in the bottom there. Looking at Elaviv, she's a powerful. I said she's a scout archer, right? So she is she's a fighter, and you could say that she's a ranger, but not really. She's just a really good fighter. But she could scout, she could track. Ranger is so overused. I'm like, is it really? Mechanically, sure. I use a little bit of ranger in there every now and then. I mean, if I needed anything, but she's an awesome character. She has raised the kids for the past 10 years. That's the most important thing for us to know at this point in the story, is that she raised the kids. Let's see here, and then I wanted to point this out too. So if you look at these two pictures, right? So this is Storm. Storm had painted this one, with watercolors, and Art MK, a friend of ours who later joins the show and is one of our great voice talents. She's absolutely wonderful. Melissa, she did this painting and it floored me. Absolutely floored me. You can see how beautiful Elaviv is in this picture. And I thought that was great, because Elaviv is such a wonderful character in the story, right? So, but that was a great tribute to such a wonderful character. I love the green background echoing her, her forest, And let's see here. I think that's what we got there. Let's go ahead and bring it back. I'm going to go grab number 2, and we'll just keep on moving. We might even get to 4 in this tonight. We'll see what happens. Who knows? All right.
Dawn of Dragons, Season 1, Episode 2. The sounds of merriment were deafening outside the small oak room. The bloodwood table was smooth to the touch. A deep coat of linseed oil mixed with peppermint rubbed into her finger gently as she stroked it. She looked at herself in the mirror. A smile crept across her face.
Feels like a full house.
She looked back at the small dish of peach-colored powder and the small horsehair brush in her hand. Smiling, she dabbed at it quickly and briskly applied it to her cheeks, bringing out the soft contours of her cheekbones under her bold eyes. There was a knock at the door.
Come in.
A joyful face peeked in at the door's handle height. It was Avar, the tavern's owner.
My, don't you look splendid? We are almost ready to receive you, my shining star. So everyone will be blinded by your beauty. Only your sweet music will save us from being lost forever.
He twirled and clasped his hands together, barely able to contain his excitement.
Are you excited?
Yes!
This, my dear, is a magnificent evening. The ale is bold, the wine is sweet, the cookies and the pastries are all lavish, and not one person is in a foul mood. Ah, yes. I almost forgot.
He reached into his pocket.
This is for you. You look like a queen, and you need to be paid as a queen.
He handed her a small bag of gold tied with a small golden dragon for a brooch.
Oh, Ever, thank you.
My dear, I should thank you. Since you have come to work for me, my place is so wonderful and cheery. What we all need in this rough time.
He became a bit somber.
I know it won't last forever, but this establishment will enjoy you while you're here.
She smiled and put her hand gently on his shoulder.
Evar, I have no intention on leaving.
Hush, child.
He said, brushing under his eye briefly, giving her a reassuring smile.
You are young, and Port Lefort is not a place to build a life. We are survivor here, you and I. You are too much of a star. I want you back in the sky from which you fell.
He paused, thinking of something far away, as he took her hands in his. With a smile and a squeeze, he finally said,
Wherever that is, promise me you'll find it.
She smiled, knowing her little friend's big giving heart wouldn't let her leave until she agreed.
All right, I promise.
He nodded, and as she rose to leave, a big grin on his face, as he reached into his pocket, producing a small vial of yellow liquid, took off the crystal topper and dropped a few drops in the palm of his hand. As he gently slapped his rosy powdered cheeks with it, the smell of pine and honey came to her nose pleasantly. He smiled at her and offered his hand with a bow. Mustering up his pride and joviality, he proclaimed to her,
Cordelia Shieldheart, Muse of Port Lefort, please come with me, for tonight is
a night to remember.
Cordelia and Avar laughed as they left the dressing room hand in hand. The smell of sweet spiced wine, frothy ale, and even a slight tinge of pungent pipe smoke filled the air. The lady's fingers cookies had been almost taken as fast as they'd set them down on the long table used for the potluck of dishes brought in for the celebration. Tonight was the first night of the annual 3-day festival in Port Lefort, marking the beginning of the trade season with the North. Half of the year, the waters only allowed trade with what the sailors called the Southlands. Though separated by continents and cultures, the kingdoms of Viridian and Trull actively traded year-round with the Kingdom of Kur, where Port Lefort resided, preferring to use Kur as middle ground for trade, as they were neutral in most wars that sprouted up from time to time. The elves of Viridian and the orcs and men of Trull were always looking for fine smith goods of the dwarves, whether golden vases with gemstones encrusting the surface, making the light dance in a room, or the dwarven steel sword that was rarely needed to be sharpened. In return, the people of Kur had to look for them for food and fineries the harsh desert couldn't provide. But only during the warmer months did the majority of the heavy merchant ships make those trips north. After the ice had broke, the sea had calmed, and so did the creatures beneath its dark waves. This was when the furs, oils, and gems of the north could be traded. The artisans of all countries looked forward to this time, as many of their goods depended on this for their own trade. The tavern was bursting at the seams.
I wanted to take a quick note here. So let me bring this back. All right, we got this guy, and I'm going to just zoom in on it. You don't need to read anything in here, but in the center map, you see down here on the lower area, this is the Southlands. When they talk about the Southlands trade route, that's what that is. In fact, I zoom in on it. So right now we're here in Port Lefort, and like Alnotcon was up here, and they've traveled down to here. So Bloodwood, Kur, Viridian will pass. There's first port over here. That's their trade route. They'll take that around the Deadlands. There's not a whole lot. The Deadlands is kind of like the centerpiece that is very mysterious. It's all jungles, and there's a few expeditions that happen from Darkovnia to go there. The tribes of people that live there, the various various groups are largely untouched. That's the key. Like nobody wants to mess with the Deadlands. Name itself kind of helps with that. But Troll, and then up here is Bells. Okay, so yeah, that's kind of how that works. So Darkovia down, Troll back to there, right? So the up here in the Northlands, that's what only happens once a year, right? So only for part of the year. And when they can trade, that's where they're going to get the goods from the north. So, gems and precious metals and, like you said, axes and weapons from Bloodwood, and everything just kind of opens up to where they can resume trade. That's the whole lifeblood of the trade barons. So, all right, let's hit it again.
Shoulder to shoulder, people stood waiting in anticipation for a seat to open. A short man with bushy eyebrows looked and spied an empty seat at a table with 3 other people. He moved through the crowd towards it. He reached for the chair.
Taken, friend.
The young raven-haired man spoke to him. The little man sighed and walked away, almost bumping into a tall woman with golden hair in a reddish suit of scale mail, carrying 4 mugs in her hands.
Excuse me?
The woman shouted at the little man as he darted into the crowd. With a sigh, she continued to her table, remarking to herself that the bar was packed, and there was no way the barmaids could ever get to them right now, and that they were on their own. Sophie sat down the mugs and began passing them out.
There we are, Lviv. Wine for you and I, ale for you and Zoran, and...
Milk?
Benedict asked questioningly. Sophie smiled.
Yes, only the finest here, of course.
He smiled and took it from her with both hands, offering a gentle nod of appreciation.
Thank you, Sophie.
Lviv said, elbowing Zoran in the ribs.
Indeed. Thank you.
Sophie chuckled with Zoran.
Oi, watch where you're going.
Benedict noticed the Minotaur protest as 2 thugs pushed past it to set a dimly lit table back in the dark corner of the bar. They had dark cloaks and hoods covering themselves, looked to be made of rough wool. They roughly shoved a terrified man into a seat and sat to either side of him. His wide eyes seemed to dart back and forth from behind the dirty, unwashed face. His thin, scraggly beard framed the gaunt and wiry features of the man as he trembled. He was dressed in dark black armor that hung loose from his body, barely finding anything to hold on to. Benedict could feel his own hair stand on end. He started to turn a hand back to the table without taking his eyes off them.
Hey, Zoran, do you see...
Avar stepped out onto the oak stage. Towering over the crowd, he wrapped a cane topped with a lion's head on planking, echoing through the room. The crowd grew silent.
Ladies and gentlemen of Port Lefort, tonight we celebrate together the new season. And together, may the stone judge us to be worthy of a great riches.
The crowd erupted in cheers. He looked at the crowd and smiled, stretching out his arms, embracing the cheers and soaking the energy in. Benedict was staring at the dark men. They were motionless, the terrified man looking like he was about to cry.
My friend, she is not a stranger, nor is she a stranger to you. Without further ado, please welcome the muse of Port Lefort, Cordelia!
The crowd cheered for the local favorite. Benedict noticed the smaller of the 2 cloaked men turn toward the stage sharply. After a moment, his shrouded head turned side to side, scanning the area. 3 other musicians had taken the stage, flanking Cordelia. They each nodded and smiled before the tavern went deathly quiet. They could hear her breath as she raised the ivory flute to her lips, a small carved dragon dangling from her wrist. bar erupted with cheers as Cordelia bowed her head. The other musicians smiled and applauded her as well. They launched into an upbeat melody and the room began dancing. Zoran leapt up and slammed his empty mug on the table. With his usual flair, he offered his hand to Sophie. She laughed and waved him away.
Well, fine then.
He grinned and then, bowing, began to join a few sailors in a rowdy hornpipe dance. Sophie and Eleviv cheered. Benedict was staring at the dark men. One roughly grabbed the terrified man and jerked him out of his seat. The other nodded as they made their way out of the bar. He tried to get the attention of his friends, but he found it hopeless. Benedict, though someone who followed a moral code of honor, wasn't a stranger to the occasional bar brawl after all, and had a few scars marring the 20-year-old's young face. Action being imperative, he rose up and followed them outside into the street.
All right, let's pause there real quick. So, a couple notes that I had throughout that. Of course, it's the first time that we're really hearing about Benedict with the raven hair. The fact that he's a milk drinker. The whole milk drinking thing. I used to love. I think my favorite pirate movie of all time was Return to Treasure Island. Okay. And from way back in the 50s. So that was, it's gonna kill me. In fact, I can't remember his name. I'm like, Robert Louis Stevens. No, it's can't remember who played Long John Silver off top. Oh, I almost had there. I'll slap myself later. It's okay. So, but when he gets milk, he's like, the bartender hands him milk and he drinks it and he goes, "Ah, milk! I've been poisoned," and that becomes like this big joke. And I've always loved that. So, Benedict being the milk drinker was always kind of a kick. Let's see here. We have the three people, right? That are mysterious. They seem to have a hostage. Benedict's not about that. He's going to go chase them down. We'll join them here in a moment. Cody Miller playing Zoran is a hoot in this scene. He's a lot of fun. So when he jumps up and he's doing the hips and the ups and all that stuff, dancing around having fun. So the music in here, most of the time I'm doing sampled instruments. I play them on the keyboard, but largely it's a lot of sampled instruments. I'm an electronic musician for most of the time I've been a musician. When I compose, that's the way I do it. But in this one, what's kind of fun is this hornpipe that's playing. I sequenced most of it, but I did play the concertina, like a real concertina, in the background. So as I say, I'm honking away in the background. So you just hear, so that's me in a squeeze box, and so that's kind of a fun little flavor that I remember having fun with. I do not have a sitar, and you can tell that is a sample sitar, but the concertina in the background, that actually is me just having fun. So, all right, let's go ahead and join Benedict out in the street and see what happens here.
The market square was 100 feet on all four sides, with a fountain of gray stone in the center of the smooth river rock cobblestones. The fountain was depicting a lion and a bear facing east and west, respectively. People were still making their way to the Pig and Turtle. It was the biggest tavern and was known for the best entertainment. Other shops lined the open square, and people strolled through, making their way to the various destinations. The smell of fruit, the sea, and spices filling the air.
Just tell us when. I don't you ever.
Benedict saw at the end of the building he had just walked from, there were the two men, one gripping the collar of the small man and roughly interrogating him.
You there!
Benedict started to jog to the men. his hand resting on the brass pommel of the broadsword swinging at his hip. They jolted, looking at him obviously startled. The small man broke free of the grip and ran down the dark alley, chased by the larger man. The third man, the smaller of the cloaked figures, stood up straight and shook his head, looking very annoyed. He turned and ran across the market. Benedict recognized the tactic and knew him to be the one with the answers. Sprinting through the street, the man leapt over a small cart and pulled a stack of apple crates down to separate his pursuer. Benedict dodged around them deftly and continued to sprint, the broadsword clanking at his side. He noticed the man was not hindered by a sword. The man dodged into a clothing shop, and as Benedict neared the entrance, he quickly unhooked his sword belt, where it clanged to the steps just outside the door.
Move!
He shouted at the terrified shopkeep, who dodged backwards into a pile of soft linens for sale. The dark man spun around just in time to catch a fist across his right cheek and a shoulder into his chest, pressing him into the wall. Benedict could smell trail dust and the musk of a man that had been on horseback for a very long time.
Wait, you don't understand.
The voice sputtered out of breath from behind the dark veil, his blue eyes determined.
Who are you? Why are you here?
Benedict gritted his teeth.
What were you doing with that man?
The shrouded man grabbed Benedict's arm, his dark sleeve falling back. Benedict's eyes grew wide.
Listen, we've traveled a long way to warn this town, and I don't have time to explain. Something horrible is about to happen, and that man has the details as to when.
Benedict was staring at the man's arm, trembling.
It can't be.
What?
Benedict nodded, with the trembles still not letting down his guard.
Where did you get that scar?
That has nothing to...
Where?
The man sighed and looked around, judging his options. Realizing the best one lay in front of him, he took off the dark veil, revealing a short week's old soft blonde beard, and pulling his hood back, the sandy blonde locks fell across his cheeks.
I saved my brother from a fire many years ago.
Tears welled in Benedict's eyes.
Benedict?
The man's eyes welled up, years of solitary pain and hope boiling to the surface along with his tears. The long-lost brothers embraced in that shop.
I thought we lost you.
I did too, honestly, and it's a story I promised to tell you soon, but we need to...
Screams erupted from the square as flashing fire illuminated the terrified shopkeep's face.
We need to go.
Bolting out the door, Benedict grabbed his sword from the ground. The red glow of erupting fire casting eerily familiar upon the dark leather scabbard. Looking up from the damp cobblestone, he saw them. He saw the dragons. Thank you for joining us.
All right, so I can't let a moment last too long, I guess. So let's see here. The notes I have in here, that last little part that we had, of course, there's the chase, right? So when Benedict is chasing Zane, he doesn't realize it's Zane yet, but he's chasing after Zane, and it says they jumped over a cart, and you hear that kind of like the debris sound, or the boom of the cart, the cart. I was in the backyard, and I ran across like many houses in our area out here in Colorado, and I think it's a common building technique, right? Is you have gravel around the outside of the foundation to help with drainage, and so I was running through the rocks, and that's what you were hearing. So I'm running through the rocks, and I was listening to, because I still didn't know how to record this show. I was still figuring things out. I was still using a copy of Adobe Audition, if I remember right, and Audition itself, and the actual application Audition. And both of those are waveform editing applications for the most part. Like, you can mix with them, but they can get kind of wicked with themselves. They're unforgiving, let's put it that way. So I came up with the idea of I mixed down the scene where I'm talking about it. I went outside and I put on my headphones and I took my I have a Tascam DR10 or DR40 hand recorder, right? And I just turned that on and I ran back and forth in the gravel while listening to myself talk about the scene and just kind of acted it out like a Foley artist would do for film. So when it came to the cart, though, this is what I'm getting at. It's kind of a funny note. My daughter had a play kitchen in the backyard, right? And with those Rubbermaid, and it was a hand-me-down from one of our neighbors had left. And when they were leaving, they asked if we wanted it. And so Ari had that play kitchen. So I grabbed the play kitchen and I just tipped it over. So that boom sound is that play kitchen kind of spilling out on the concrete as I run by on the gravel. So just kind of funny. All right, so that's what I have there. Okay, give me a second. We'll grab a drink of water. We'll grab the next one here. Now we got the dragons have shown up. All right. And now it's going to be the Dark Reunion. All right. This episode has a lot in it, and I love it. I think this was a great story. When we played it at the table, it was like devastating for everybody because it's, it is what it is, right? It's the dawn of, it's the crucible, right? There's the crucible moments in your life that you have to go through to become the person on the other side. So I had a manager of mine tell me that in as a coaching point, told me, it's called the crucible, right? So crucible is you put different you put metals in it, or you put whatever, right? But you heat it up to, there's so much heat and contained, and it's pressure and what have you, that it turns into a different thing altogether. So it's like life. So but yeah, it's a crucible time. This was a crucible time, and it had fire. Hey, it fits. So speaking of fire, we'll just jump right back in. Boom. Let's hit this.
Dawn of Dragons, Season 1, Episode 3. Fire was erupting into the tavern from stage right, billowing like tendrils of amber along the ceiling like writhing snakes. The age-old varnish taking the coarse, acrid smoke from the burning bloodwood, tar, and oak beginning to fill the hall.
Cordelia!
Sophie yelled at the woman on stage.
Jump!
Cordelia was shocked. She looked back at Avar. The small man blew her a kiss and waved, mouthing out goodbye with a smile on his face, tears welling in his eyes before he dove into the stairwell to the backstage. Nimbly dodging the burning debris falling from above, blocking the way for larger people than he.
Now! We don't have time!
Elaviv yelled. Snapping back, Cordelia nodded. Her eyes narrowed slightly as she jumped off the stage into Sophie's arms. Zoran was shoving a few panicked stragglers out the door.
What's going on out there? Do you hear that? Something's coming.
Move! The world is ending. What does it matter? Move or you will too!
With a final shove, he pushed them out of the way as a fiery beam crashed to the floor where he once stood.
Mother of... Hey! Over here!
He waved to Elaviv and his sisters. They pointed at the exit adjacent to him along the smooth stone brick wall. The bitter smell of the smoke burned the throat, and the greasy texture hung close to the body as Zoran made his way to the exit. Coughing, a hand grabbed his and pulled him free of the smoky room into the night air. The air cooled his lungs immediately, but then his ears filled with the screams. The roar from above sounded like 100 lions, and huge wings that blotted out the night sky beat heavily in his ears as it passed overhead to land by the fountain. Astride his back was an orc clad in black-scaled armor. She yelled guttural commands at the dragon. The dragon was everything Zoran had seen in a nightmare. Its twin horns pointed forward and down its skeletal snout. Green, smoking acid dripped from its maw as it drooled, looking at the people running from it in the square.
Get down behind the barrels!
Sophie still had his arm and was still roughly joining Cordelia and Elaviv behind the large casks on the side of the pig and turtle.
Where's Benedict?
I don't know.
Fear overcame Elaviv as she realized she didn't know where the young man had gone. That realization was echoed as each of them looked at each other in turn. Elaviv looked around. She was too level with the ground. She needed a better vantage point.
Zoran, you know how to get to Viridian from here, yes?
Zoran nodded, puzzled.
I'm going to try to see Benedict from above.
She pointed to the long roof behind them.
If we get separated, go to Viridian. The first port on the coast is Akesh Balol.
First port? Is that the...
Yes.
She smiled happily. He recognized the port city.
That's the common name for it. First port. From there, we sail west to Bells.
She took a deep breath, seeing their puzzled face.
It is time for us to move on. We can find more answers in the Ivory Library.
Cordelia's eyes grew wide. She had heard stories of the Ivory Library and the vast knowledge contained on its endless shelves. Supposedly every bit of history, science, technology, and magic was documented here and guarded by the legendary stone monks. The stone monks were not cruel or righteous. They were avid guardians of the cosmic balance. Elaviv looked at Sophie and smiled before darting to his stack of crates, bounding effortlessly up the rough-cut wooden planks to the roof, never disturbing a single one, as if she was a bird's feather on a gentle breeze. More roars rang out above, followed by one from the black dragon currently in the square. The deafening thunder from those leathery wings kicked up dust and embers from the street, causing Sophie to shield her eyes from the gusts. Another dragon, this one deep blue scales and a yellow smooth underbelly, landed with a lurch as it whipped its tail to a street cart filled with vegetables. This was followed by a much larger crimson-scaled worm, with dark black beard of horns and scales around its chin. Two horns shot up and back from its skull as it whipped its head to the side to roar at some scurrying, terrified people. Cordelia was frozen. She was horrified and entranced at the same time. Here in the flesh were dragons. Those great dragons of legend her father had told her about so many years ago. The red dragon took an uneasy step towards the stack of barrels they hid behind. Zoran ducked low with the other two and motioned a single finger in front of his lips to indicate absolute silence. The dragon's head swept by the barrels with a single yellow eye of curiosity. The black slit of an iris dilated slightly.
Fury, let us discuss the plan for this great city.
A deep shout came from his back. The dragon swung his head back to the dragons in the square. It was Zoran's turn to be shocked. He wide-eyed craned his neck over the barrels with Sophie and Cordelia.
Is that?
None.
Zoran saw the huge man drop from the back of the red dragon with the crown of dragons on his black-haired head. He held a huge sword in his hand. His heart was pounding deep in his stomach. There was the silver dragon turtle pommel, with two red eyes glowing with power.
Hello, Father.
He spat, restrained behind clenched, angry teeth. Lord Pallas strode to the center of the three dragons. The orc rider nimbly slid off her mount to join him. The dark chains shook like chimes as she walked. The third rider was shrouded. The pale hands clutched the haft of a large studded mace. Their eyes shone out like two orange-red glowing embers from behind the dark veil. They too dismounted and joined the other 2 riders for the conference.
With this, Kerr is ours along with Bloodwood and most of Viridian.
Most, not all. Rotten elves still hold access to the dark reaches.
No matter, we are victorious. They will soon fall.
They hold fast, but we must not let them escape.
The pale figure hissed, the dark shroud of his face falling away to show a single sunken cheek.
This is defeatist prattle.
He turned to Lord Pallas.
What now, my lord?
We will raise the town for supplies and set up a garrison. Then we will make our assault on Viridian.
He grew very cold as he thought deeply.
Our underground allies must be freed. They will be the key to my ascension.
The orc leader laughed and pulled a horn from her belt, sounding it. From the shadows, orc armies began to appear and flow as a single chaotic mass into the square and shops from Cordelia's right.
Zoran.
He was still intent on his father, the source of 10 years of hate from that night.
All right, break it up a little bit here. So, lots of detail, right? So we got the 3 dragon riders that land. You have the man, the dark cleric, right? On the back of the blue dragon, you have the orc rider. On the back of the black dragon, and her name is Squib, and she comes up later. And the dark cleric is Decion, so who is a recurring bad guy, right? As well, they're all recurring. And then we have Pallas on the back of Fury, right? So even address them as Fury. And in the image above, you can see, Fury facing off with an archer on the rooftop. All right, so more to come on that, right? So let's see here. So the dragon breath sounds, that's something of note. So I was making up a lot of these sounds myself, for able to afford to get into more professional libraries or work with other artists, other sound technicians that had ways of creating some of these voices. So the dragon howls is they're me with a leather mug over my face or something like that, that kind of a thing. So I'm doing that kind of stuff. Apply some effects to it, and then the whenever I use when there's the undead. Give me a second. I think it is no secret with my friends that worked with me or what have you, but never underestimate the power of the Aztec death whistle, right, for making sounds of the undead. So you right, it makes a great howling sound. So I'll take that, apply reverb to it and all that, and just makes it horrifying, right? It's a horrifying sound. So I just kind of learned how to do that. I have a, where is it? Is it within reach? Give me another second. I'll just show you some of my Foley stuff that I used, right? So there's the undead. I told you what I did with the dragon, with chainmail, right? So when you hear chainmail, I just kind of like someone's running, or I'll actually do it this way. I use this. The sound of the chain links, kind of, that's what it sounds like when you're fair. You're wearing chainmail. And if you try running, It'll sound like that. And this just kind of funny. This is you see the lock on there. I wore this as a costume when I was Jacob Marley. All right. You there, boy. What day is it? Why is Christmas Day, sir? This little kid's Money in the Bank. I'm a wrestler. I like wrestling. Okay, it's okay. Let me like my things. This is the best sound for fist impacts. You know, so I take that and you get some good sounds out of it. So, yeah, and some of the basic sounds that I would use just in line when I was trying to figure out how I was going to do things. Right, being an electronic musician again, I look back and I laugh at myself because I don't think it was until like season 2 when I was like, man, there's got to be an easier way to do this because I keep doing the Foley, you know, like that, and how am I supposed to do that? And that's when I went, wait, I sample instruments. Let me make my own instruments. And so I started using the sampler and applying sound effect sounds to multiple pieces. So it was pretty great. So yeah, it's so each key on the keyboard essentially became a different sound effect. So I could just sit there and listen to it, and I could Foley to it as it was walked through. So, but there we go. All right. So next up, let's see what we got here. Fire this up.
A loveless relationship before them. The night he had lost his best friend.
Zoran!
What?
Move!
Sophie stood and shoved Zoran out of the way as a huge cleaver-like blade crushed the barrel they were behind. Zoran rolled and stood on his feet, his rapier deftly in his hand. He moved to Cordelia, who was cupping a small bolt of fire in her hands that slowly began to grow. Sophie swatted a great axe to the side as she drove a shoulder to the orc, knocking him backwards. Cordelia, her eyes closed, and she mumbled some arcane words before throwing it at the orc in front of Sophie. It met its mark, exploding in a shower of sparks, sending the orc back on his heels to the ground. They darted across the courtyard towards an open alley the orcs hadn't reached yet. The red dragon roared and swung a tail at them as they scattered, barely missing the muscular tree trunk-sized limb. Zoran rolled under it, feeling the breath of wind as it sailed mere feet from his body, smashing into the store face for a bakery, sending flour dust and a plume out of the gaping wound of the wall.
Go!
He shouted at Cordelia, who was wide-eyed next to him. Rising up, he heard a shout. Standing on the rooftop was a figure. Her flame-red hair cascaded from her shoulders, keeping time with the fire now surrounding her. Elaviv calmly drew an arrow to her cheek before sending it loose. The arrow sailed across the courtyard, slamming into an orc pursuing 2 other figures. She recognized the armor of one. Definitely was Benedict, but the other ran alongside him with 2 crude orcish daggers drawn. They continued to run to the alley. Elaviv felt the heat of the fire dancing across her back as she fired arrow after arrow covering their escape.
Zoran. Sophie. Benedict.
She saw the figure next to Benedict running. She saw him whip around an orc in the same fluid motion, cut him down with those 2 daggers. Whoever he was on their side, and therefore she had him too. Arrow shot. The flame grew higher and hotter.
Just a minute longer. Please.
She fired. The flames could reach her arms now. It burned, but the children were almost safe.
Just a minute longer.
She had to hold strong. She fired again and again, ignoring the searing pain in her arm. The smell of smoke and the burning was nauseating. Tears welled in her eyes. She would do this. She would do this one last thing. They had reached the alley. She sighed. They had made it. She saw the shrouded man look at her, with one arm raised in acknowledgement. She knew those eyes.
Could it be?
And with a nod, he disappeared. In that moment, something familiar washed over her. A memory at the forefront of her mind. Tears flowed as she looked at the rising face of Fury, his face glowing with a bright red fireball burning in his mouth, glowing and growing. She laughed inwardly to herself, dropping her bow to her side. She thought of all the happiness she shared in this life. It was a good day. She thought of her love and their lost friends, and hoped that they would all meet again in this next life. She took a deep breath of the smoky air, smelling past the smoke, past the salt sea to her soft, sweet-smelling trees. She smiled wide and closed her eyes, remembering her promise.
I held the oath, Argus. May the knight and maiden watch them now.
Throwing out her arms, Elaviv embraced the white-hot fire of the dragon. The children shot into the alley, the sounds of the city being taken down slowly dimming as they made their way in the dark, musty alleys to the edge of the city.
Wait.
Soren panted.
Wait. Who are you?
He pointed at the shrouded man.
We don't have time, but soon
Sophie's eyes grew wide.
No.
She stepped forward and the man looked away quickly.
You don't understand.
She reached out.
Is it?
As her hand closed on the hood, the man's hand clasped hers gently. His eyes were pleading with her, not because of fear of her knowing, but of him finally leaving his shroud of 10 years of fear and pain. He sighed and pulled back his hood, his blonde locks cascading to his shoulders.
I dreamed of seeing you again every day, Sophie.
Oh my gods. Zane.
Sophie embraced him with hot tears cutting past in her soot-stained cheeks. And Zane wept too, as Zoran, Cordelia, and Benedict joined them all together once again in the dark alley of Port Lafort.
All right, so it's always so sad. Okay, man, Elvie's awesome. Just oh, she's wonderful. So at the table, I did have this. I can show you guys this. So this is pretty much what it looked like at the table. So I had made this little storefront. I made a couple of these out of popsicle sticks, and because it's made out of wood, I just used some to hold it together. This is actually a diaper box, is what that is. So I used that, kind of built the base of it, and then just popsicle sticks, put that together, stained it, used some Sculpey to make the little barrels and what have you. But you can see the minis. These are actually the minis that we used at the time. I had just printed out on cardstock characters I found on Google, different images of people. And that's where some of their descriptions came from, was just from the minis. So like Sophie's up front, she's kind of blurry, so you can't really see her too well, but she's got that reddish armor and the her flowing blonde hair. And then up on the rooftop here, because this is the Pig and Turtle. So up on the rooftop there is Elaviv in her, and when we put the painting behind her to show that that's what she was thinking of, was her friends Erebus and Lorahana. And then Fury getting ready to be a terrible person. All right, so the other thing I could point out in here is two things. So I know there's a couple players I'm seeing in that are connected. So current players, where we're at currently in the story, just kind of give everybody an idea. There's there's phases, and I have to keep the phases straight as I write, as I produce the story, as I all the aspects of it. I like to give them little snippets as we go, right? Because that's the fun of it. I mean, it's all one big story, but it's fun to just kind of like drop some of these things as we go. So the snippet in here that I heard, that I dropped in, when Lord Pallas talks about my underground allies must be freed. I wonder who that is. So players, what and who is he talking about with the underground allies must be freed? I wonder where that is in regards to Viridian. Okay, so we have that. Now the other part that came up is another harbinger, right, was the flower dust. So the dragon's tail slams into the storefront bakery, and flower dust goes everywhere. Before this incident happens with Elaviv, and Elaviv is killed by Fury. That's important. That's important to note. Is the flower? If we go back to the prologue, the significance of the flower with the angel wings, right? So it's like it all starts to kind of scoop together a little bit as one recurring theme. What else did I have in here for you? One of my friends had passed away, and at the Ren Fair, the barbarian group I'm part of, the Horde, held a wake for him. We all did a shot and had our memories. The group is big with the local Klingon chapter too, so they did Death Cry as well. But there's a huge horn by my friend Jal. This is like 4 feet long, I think is what it is. It's a Texas Longhorn. It's a big horn, and it's what we call a blower, where you can sound it and you can put the cork in, you can drink out of it, right? So it's both. And the thing's just massive. But he blew that horn. That's the horn sound that we used, that I used for when Squib sounds her horn. I thought it sounded cool. If you listen real closely, you can even hear some of the crowd from Fair in the background. It matches with the crowd that's running and screaming a little bit, so that's okay. It's not too jarring. Well, it's just kind of fun. Let's see. Yeah, the oath to Erebus, her love and her lost friends, right? So that's important to note as we go. All right, let's go ahead and hit one more. Let's go. Let's hit episode 4. We got time.
Dawn of Dragons, Season 1, Episode 4. Her hands broke the crystal-like surface of the cold forest stream. The smell of the meadow flowers mixed with aspen and birch sweetly. She smiled, thinking of her friend's stories of how the forest calmed her and set her spirit free. She blinked a tear away gently, knowing Elaviv was gone, her spirit free, hopefully, in her beloved forest. She took a deep breath, bringing the icy water to splash gently about her face. She imagined the battle being washed away as well in her mind. She drew breath and counted, and remembered. The hard branch Carlin used to train with struck her across the thigh, dropping young Sophie to her knees.
Ow!
She said through clenched teeth angrily.
Now count, Sophie. Count until you're calm.
Carlin, being 17, towered over her. Her raven black hair cascaded about her shoulders. Icy blue eyes stared at her with no emotion. The eyes of a killer, the eyes of her sister.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Sophie panted for air between breaths shortly, her anger holding her in its grip.
Slower. You must breathe to fight. Every breath should give you more power. 6, 7, 8, 9, 10.
She could feel the air in her lungs and the power it brought. Her blood slowed, feeling rich and full. She stood up, and her sister smiled wryly.
Good.
Sophie?
Zane's voice snapped her back to reality.
What?
Sophie was short in her response, sounding agitated.
It's just... I wanted to tell you.
What? That you've been alive this whole time? That you're sorry you abandoned us? That you abandoned me?
No. Sophie...
Zane drew in a deep breath.
I wanted to tell you about what happened.
Fine.
Sophie glared at him.
I'll listen.
She sat hard on a fallen log, crossing her arms. Truth be told, she very much loved this familiar ghost of a man before her. His eyes and voice were all the same she remembered for the last 10 years. The boys she thought dead, and they all thought dead, had returned. Now here they were in the same place again. Was she still that same little girl he knew? What of him? Was he still who she remembered? Or was it like Elaviv's cookies, where they may have been better in memory than in reality? So now, after escaping the town and camping last night in the dark forest, he wants to talk. Inside, she was screaming for answers. But as Carlin had said,
We win because we wait.
Zane was staring off into the distance, where the forest opened up into a glade. The birds' soft chirping and the cries of the occasional hawk were soft on the ears, as the breeze was to the touch.
I woke up on the back of a horse bouncing with my hands tied. The smell of the horse and the dried sweat and blood caked to my face was enough to make me sick. And by where I was at and the side of the horse's leg, I already had. We had been riding way out to the west from the town, I gathered. Despite my nose's damage, I began smelling something else. Muggy, like old dishwater. I could hear voices mumbling to each other. I don't remember much else. I was given to an old dwarf named Silas. Silas was rough and hateful. He'd smack you for breathing out of turn, let alone stepping out of line. He showed us smaller ones how to go deeper in those mines than the tall folk, as he called everyone else. We would slide those wooden trays in front of us, and we scurried on our bellies in the dark. God, Sophie, it was so dark. Blindly groping at the walls for ore to bring back to the smelter. Ore to make iron, and iron to make steel. Steel to make weapons. Weapons for his army. Over time, we grew accustomed to it a bit. Not like the elves or dwarves can see in the dark, but we could almost sense shapes in the dark. Feel the dark. Feel how close the walls were to us as we drug our trays in that endless dark. Anyways, I did this for a long time until one day...
You, boy, get up, fetch my mug.
I looked up to see a large ogre towering over me. His eyes were still adjusting to the light in the mineshaft junction where we brought back our collections.
Boy!
To be honest, I couldn't hear him very well. Being in those tunnels really makes you distant. Like you aren't a part of this world. I just kind of stared at him.
I said, boy, fetch.
I remember him hitting me across the cheek so hard stars danced across my squinting eyes. Zane was all I could mumble.
What did you say to me?
Zane. It felt so good to say I forgot about the pain. I hadn't heard my own name in so long. I knew I could die, but I didn't care. This big lunk of an ogre would say my name or I would die trying. My name is Zane. He grabbed me with one hand and threw me against the wall. I felt every jagged rock edge dig into my back while the wind flew out of my lungs. He cursed as he walked to me, drawing a cracked leather blackjack from his belt. I sputtered on the ground, unable to move, and then I saw him.
Back down, Sledge.
The ogre stopped immediately, and from behind him appeared a tall man in black, tattered, tight-fitting clothes. A great club was strapped to his back, though, looking at the muscled arms hidden beneath the dark leather bracers and the blue-black cotton sheds, he didn't need it. His chest was protected by a dark set of charcoal chainmail with leather segments sporadically placed. It was his face.
Zane paused for a moment, thinking. The smell of the trees was lost to him, and the running brook at his feet no longer captivated him. Suddenly, Zane snapped back and cupped his face in his hands, taking a deep breath of air. He shuddered slightly. Sophie put her hand on his shoulder. He looked at her and smiled.
It was his eyes. They were blood red. He had no face, well, none that we ever knew. See, there was the same black gauze covering the helmet he wore. The black horns the only thing protruding out, curving down towards the front of the face like an angry bull. Sledge backed up, looking both disappointed and scared at the same time.
We'll keep an eye on this one.
Why wait, Maldros?
I think Silas hobbled over, glaring at me.
He's no good here.
He walked over to me.
Maybe your pits would be a more suitable place for someone as irresponsible, lazy, and generally worthless.
He jabbed me with the crooked stick he carried to drive the point of each word. Maldros sneered at me from behind that mask.
Yes. Why wait, indeed?
Hey! Zoran's voice shook Zane back to reality. He came up to them in a light jog.
Are you two ready to hit the road?
Sophie stood up and checked her sword's fit.
Yeah, I think we are,
Zane said briefly. Zoran nodded and walked back to where Cordelia was packing their small collection of shared supplies in a small backpack.
Zane,
Sophie began softly.
I can only imagine what you've been through. I hope you understand if I'm...
She paused. Truth be told, she never stopped loving him, nor did she think she could. Little did she know he felt the same for her.
It's okay.
He smiled.
I don't think we should jump back into where we were.
He offered her a hug with a crooked smile she knew all too well. If she had any doubts this was really him, they were dispelled in that moment.
Where we were? What, when we were 10? Let's just start here. We don't need to talk about then.
She smiled and pulled back, looking into his eyes.
Let's begin here and now. Will you stay with us now?
Forever,
Zane said with a smile.
I never want to leave any of you again.
Then come, let's go.
Friends?
For now, Zane Shieldheart. For now.
Cordelia smiled at Benedict.
It's good to hear her laugh again.
Sure is.
Benedict smiled at their happiness. It was like a dream come true. They were all back together again. All right. I think this is when I got better about delineating the scenes with that door. I just heard the door starting to open shut. So, looking back on this episode, so first it's called Memories, right? So they're flashing back. They're thinking about things. They're in
um, in Viridian, or they're getting close to Viridian. Let's put it that way. They're crossing from Kerr into Viridian. Let's see here. I'm gonna pull this up here real fast while I'm thinking about it. I found it interesting that I remember sometimes you leave a hint, and the hint isn't as good of a hint as you think it's going to be to the team, so it just flies way over their head. And it's not like they would have picked up on it, so I just have to apologize flat out. The problem that we had was the let's see here. I'm going to go to log in. The hint I'm talking about is when Zane is talking about, I know I was traveling for days, and it's like, no, you weren't. You weren't traveling for days at all. Bring this up. I'll throw it over here. There we go. All right. Let's see my screen a bit better here. All right. So they left Port Lafort, and then this travel here, you see the travel to the first port as told in S1E4. So if you ever want a visual aid, you can just go over to the Codex. So codex.dicetowertheater.com. This forest right here is known as the Forest of Memories, and that's very important to note. Doesn't come up in this episode. It's just kind of everybody traveling through it gets thinking about Elaviv or thinking about their past. You know, when Zoran was traveling, when he said west, he was going east. So they took him from Alanatkon over here, and you see this dual city on the back of that dog. You know, this is where they have the arena for Bloodwood. So it's the Bloodwood, Trull, Wolfling, and Darkovnia. All four of them have a gladiator presence. In Bloodwood, it's popular with those that have the coin to bet on it. In Trull, it's a huge thing. It's a huge arena that's more for the public. It's more of a public spectacle. That comes up in season 4. In what's just kind of hinted at, and it'll come up more as the story progresses in the future. Because as I said, like the players are still playing the game, and it takes a while for us to, in those phases, to actually release these shows. So we're currently releasing season 6, which has been produced and sent out there, right? We're finishing up season 9 is where the game has progressed. So that kind of shows how much more story there is that the team picks up on. So anyway, so Trull, there's the big spectacle in Enrook. Darkovnia, it's all underground. So it's underground gladiator pits below the in the basements of the Shadow Barons mansions and all that stuff. So it's like it's real sketchy there. And then finally in Wolfling, it is an outdoor ring, very crude, but it works for entertainment with that group. Not that it's to be glorified or anything like that. In fact, I think the story shows how brutal all that is, that it's not meant to be a great thing at all. But that's some of the story elements that we have. All right, so last note I had on here. Oh yeah, so Zane talking about going west. No, he didn't. He went east. Silas, again, it's Bianchi. So Bianchi's the voice of Silas. He's got a limp. crooked stick. He's a little dwarf that's just very angry. Sledge, the ogre. Let's see. Maldros. Okay, so Maldros. Well, yeah. So Maldros is, in my head, I picture Death Dealer from Frank Frazetta's paintings, right? Where just jet black armor, scary looking, such a presence all over. But I thought to myself, what if those horns were real? So there, again, talk about, spoiler alert or anything like that. In season 5, you kind of find out a little bit more about him. But those horns are real. And he wears a helmet over his head that kind of cups to it. So it makes it look like he's just a human wearing a helmet all the time. And then the black gauze covers his body, but he is a half dragon. So he's a half black dragon from the Deadlands. So, not to get into too much lore here, but essentially the black dragons and the orcs of the Deadlands coexist with each other. So that's how that works. Yeah, let's go ahead and take it from there. We'll jump into this next part. They're getting ready to travel, and we'll see what else happens. But the forest itself calls to their memories. And if you remember, in the prologue, I talked about the 3 elements of Fey magic in our world. We have the torch, which is all sense and purposes standard magic, but mainly the power of fire. The element of fire plays well with the rest of Fey magic, particularly well in the elemental scheme of things. Even though they can tap into all 4 elements, fire magic is mischievous. And it kind of fits with the Fae. So you have that. You have the shield, which is defensive magic, and it's also morphine magic, right? And it's cloaking, that kind of a thing. And then finally you have the tree. And so a tree's roots go deep, and they go for a long time, right? And many trees can last thousands of years, right? I mean, there's the stories of how old is the tree known as General Sherman, right? The great redwood, right? How old is that tree? What has that tree seen? That kind of thing. The old trees, they go forever. And that's the thing, is memories tie in with dragon magic, but this is where you have the crossover, is the trees of the forest of memories. Very, very important in our world. All right, let's go ahead and hit this again.
They traveled for 4 days in the forest and meadows, trying to stay off the roads themselves in case sympathizers from Pallas's army might appear. On day 3, they rounded a hillside and could see a small encampment of dark armored soldiers tucked back in a glade, as well with a red dragon feeding on some freshly slaughtered cattle. She was slightly smaller than Fury, and the beard of black horns wasn't nearly as full, Zane noted.
Scouting party,
he said to Zoran in a hushed tone. Zoran nodded in acknowledgement. Cordelia's face showed her curiosity. Zane smiled, remembering his cousin's fascination with dragons. A few hours later, once they were a safe distance away, he broke the numbing silence.
Hey, Cordelia.
Yeah, Zane?
Do you see the beard on the dragon?
She nodded.
It's not as full as the one Pallas was riding. That means she's younger, not as powerful.
He thought about what he said, and corrected.
But still way too dangerous, though. Not even the mighty Benedict could take her down.
Benedict shot him a warning eye that made Zane laugh.
Thanks, Zane. Real cute.
There she is, gang. First port.
They came out of the trees overlooking a rocky cliffside to the sprawling green valley below. The mid-afternoon sun to their back and right made the trees cast a cool shadow across themselves. To their left, they could see the port city on the edge of the expansive sea, the salt air breathing into their lungs. Zoran clapped a grinning Zane on his back, who was in thought, chewing a small blade of grass. Smiling in return, he pointed at the docks, and they snickered at some private joke. Benedict was in awe.
It's so green. No wonder they call this land Viridian.
They all stood silent in that moment. The birds softly called from the trees. Drifting, they heard her voice on the breeze and could smell the elderflowers and honey that always accompanied Elaviv's graceful elven footsteps.
She would have so loved to have seen this.
I think she has,
Benedict said. Then he smiled, placing a hand on Cordelia's shoulder.
In fact, I think she's here with us now.
And in that moment, Sophie closed her eyes and smiled too. Thank you for joining.
All right. So here we go, everybody. So before I hit this last part, of course, hit the likes and the subscribes and all that stuff. Make sure that you're here for next time. Next Wednesday, we're going to hit this again. So make sure you're doing that while we finish up here. So looking back at this last part, one thing that's interesting is the dragon. So the dragon, the red female dragon that Zane calls out, I remember at the table there was a name that they heard, like someone mentioned Blaze, right? They mentioned Blaze. I surprised myself because I had it in my head that I put that in the show, and apparently I didn't. It's important because Blaze does show up later on in the show, facing off with some other dragons. All right. Let's see. So this is that her first appearance is just there as they're sneaking by. Classic D&D. It's good to throw a dragon at people. You can see here that now it's cutting it off for you there, but in this playlist, so season one covers levels 1 through 3 in gameplay. I actually put that into each of these so you kind of see how they progress. Dropping them with an ancient red dragon, it is just a really mean thing. But I'm a child of the 70s and 80s, right? Gen X. We do mean things, but we grew up on Dungeons and Dragons, the cartoon, where the opening scene is dropping a bunch of teenagers in front of a really powerful sorcerer and Tiamat. So it's like, there you go. Oh, Dungeon Master's like, oh, I probably better give you some magic weapons. There you go. All right, you're on your own. Here's a riddle. So not exactly the greatest things. I did want to give a shout out to the World Forge podcast. If you've never checked that out before, at this time, they were our first guests to help us on the show. So they were doing Foley for us. They did some different sounds for me, so that way I could mix those in. Piper Cleveland is the voice of Squib, who is the orc commander riding the Black Dragon, and her husband is Sam Weigel, and he was the voice of one of the bar patrons when the bar was falling in on itself. It's like burning, and Zoran was yelling at him saying, "Are you going to run?" And he's like, oh, what's that over there? He's like, who cares? Let's go. So that was Sam. Sam's like a brother. He's absolutely phenomenal. But yes, they were some of our first supporters at that time. I remember reaching out to Margaret Weiss on social media because, again, talking about Dragonlance, right? A big Dragonlance fan. So I had interacted with her on a couple of other things with miniatures or whatever, and so I decided to shoot my shot, and I sent her a note and said, "Hey, I do this show, and I think it'd be really cool if I could have you like voice a shop owner or something like that." And she's like, "Yeah, no." I'm like, "Oh, it sounds good." She's very nice about it, but yeah, we were very, very, very new. I was just kind of trying to figure out where I could get more people to jump in and join us in building the world together. So the other note that came up on that too is, or of importance, is the children here, right? They're not really children anymore, right? They're adults, but I'd still refer to them as the children or the kids. They mention that they smell elderflowers and honey, right? And so that's important to remember for Elaviv, is elderflowers and honey. That's, to me, memories, again, going back to memories, some senses trigger memories stronger, I think, than others. And it's like a sight. There's a lot of information in a sight to your eyes, and you when you do recognize something or see how something may or may not have changed over time, but with your eyes, it still hits. But I don't think anything hits as strongly as smell. So I think there is, you'll smell something, you're like, I know that, and it's like it really strikes something with you. Taste, yeah, no, not so much. Touch, right? It's kind of like, okay, sight, sounds, it smells. To me, smell is like, what was that, right? So that's the things I think we all kind of have different smells that like bring back a memory, like the smell of gasoline. I think of working in the garage with my dad, or there's the the smell of of wood paneling and cigarette smoke in the dingy basement when there's a fireplace with no grate kind of rolling and a bunch of kids playing games on the floor in a in the carpet that may or may not have gotten damaged by the children, right? That's a fond memory of mine, growing up, playing games with my siblings and friends and stuff, and in a dingy, mid-'80s basement in the sun of some smokers, right? Is this what we had? Cool. So that's what I got there. Next week, we're going to take off where we left off here. So we just finished season 1, episode 4. I now remember that most of our episodes in the earlier seasons, I can't remember when they started getting longer. It could have been in season 3. We tried to keep them to 15 minutes. So that being said, we could probably go through 4 of these an episode. So we'll see how things go next time. I don't want to overcommit, but that could be 5, 6, 7, 8. So we could finish season 1 next week is what I'm thinking, which, yeah, that's a cool story arc. So I think that'll be a lot of fun. So hopefully you'll join me next week. Again, like, subscribe, tell your friends, have them come join. If I get some more chats next week, people jumping in there, I may pick somebody random in there and like do a shirt giveaway or something. So, bring some people in. And if we see some more activity in chat and what have you. Feel free to ask me questions next time or what have you. Yeah, maybe I'll do something like that. That could be fun. But otherwise, I believe we are done for this time. Again, thanks for joining me. Until next time, next week. Yeah, enjoy. Have a great day. Take care of yourselves. Thanks again. Take care, everybody.